Record now. Oh. Greetings, welcome to the Saroth the Mage Experience. Today, experiment, calling it the experience. Today I have the wonderful Mat Hadfield, a young man from England, Derbyshire, I believe. Only 35 years old, but just published your first pamphlet on the wonderful Hadean Press. Matt, can you tell us a wee bit about yourself?
Oh, thanks for letting me come onto the show, Steve. It's an honor. Thank you. A little about myself. Well, what to say really? I went to Staffordshire University and did a film production degree that I never used, and quickly decided to leave England. It was in 2008, so there were no jobs available or anything. It was right after the whole economic crisis, so I decided to go as far away from the UK as I could and move to Japan. And yeah, I've been here for the last 13 years. Yeah. I'm an English teacher in the private sector. Yeah.
Nice. And what got you into magic, Matt? Was it like a experience? Did you have like a vision, or was it films, books? What drew you to magic in the first place?
I suppose I was always like drawn to magic or magical thinking since I can remember, since I was a kid. But when I was about 14, 15 years old, I had a series of magical events in my life. I suppose I had some contact with spirits that just like completely changed the way I perceived reality, I suppose. But they were completely outside of a ritual context. It was just
spontaneous.
Yeah, like from dreams into reality sort of thing. Like things would happen, or I had one. The most vivid one really was I received a dream from a spirit that told me I would receive 3 keys, and my family used to go to Greece, to a small island called Halki in the Mediterranean, in the Dodecanese. And on the airplane on the way there, this woman walked up to me and handed me this small key and just said, "This is yours."
Wow.
And I was, okay, that's strange. And then it sort of dawned on me. And then during that week that I was on the island, I found another key in an abandoned house, which is, again, it was really spooky the way I found it. And then when I returned home back to the UK, I went to my then girlfriend's house, and there was I found another key, and then it sort of culminated into this this thing, like essentially like there was I had another dream experience where it was, you know, you need to find out who I am, and I didn't do anything after that, but it just sort of, it was such a bizarre event in my life, and you know, and I had other experiences where like with specifically things in nature, in the, you know, in Scotland was one.
Wow. Where in Scotland, may I ask?
Oh gosh, we went camping, me and some of my friends. Where was it now? It was so long ago, I can't remember. I must have been 16, 17 years old maybe at the time, but yeah, I had a very profound spirit contact event while I was walking through the forest that they're near the campgrounds, and I couldn't explain it. And ever since those events, I was interested. I started to look into, you know, how to do this, you know, how to make contact, you know, without just being passively, you know, approached by spirits. And yeah, and then I started looking on the internet, but you know, it was back then, it was, you know, like we were talking about earlier, just it was mostly Golden Dawn, Thelema, and of course I started with those tools, and I got into like planetary magic a lot while I was at university, and and chaos magic. Of course, it was inescapable. But I always approach chaos magic from the more like from the idea of like shifting perception, changing your reality tunnel, as it were, and adopting beliefs. And I tried my best to do that, but then I suppose along with like working with the Golden Dawn and the Kabbalah and all those sort of things, I got frustrated, because really what I was interested in doing was working with spirits, communicating with spirits, and finding some methods to do that. And ultimately I ended up being drawn to the Grimoires. And so I suppose after I came to Japan, I discovered Jake Stratton Kent and his books, and that's brings us up to today, really.
Yeah, definitely. Jake Stratton Kent, I've been watching, I watch a lot of magic podcasts, and I don't think I've watched one in the last 3 months that hasn't mentioned Jake Stratton Kent's work. It's a real game changer. So my next question is, what do there's been like a renaissance of interest in grimoires and stuff, which had been totally overlooked really until maybe 10, 12 years ago. What are the main features of that kind of work compared to the older Golden Dawn Thelemic stuff, in your opinion?
Well, I think one of the biggest parts of this transition is in large thanks to more and more people becoming familiar with the Greek magical papyri and the history of magic, and especially Golden Horde Press, like Stephen Skinner, David Rankin, and Jake Stratton Kent, etc., who are like putting out source materials, and these source materials are becoming more and more widely accepted and widely read and understood, and it's giving us this window into the pre-Victorian era magic. I think up until this point, really, that 19th century, early 20th century perspective of magic has been the mainstream. People can't imagine a different way of doing things. So the new grimoire revival, if that's that's what you're calling it. It's these source documents are becoming more and more accessible, and people are starting to work with it, and they're not predicated on the Tree of Life or the Kabbalah or any of these things. And we're exploring the territory that real practitioners of magic in the past were actually engaged with. So yeah, it's difficult to escape the Golden Dawn and Thelema, but they did bring up a lot of interest in the occult and that at the time, but they threw the baby out of the bathwater with a significant amount of their approach to what magic is. So specifically with necromancy and all those other the other factors, but the necromancy really is completely whitewashed outside of the modern revival, and meaning, like, well, for instance, there's no way to work with the dead in the Golden Dawn program, for instance. It's
absolutely not.
Yeah. So, but the dead make up, like, arguably the foundation of the entire practice of magic, as we understand it in Europe, at least. So
Yeah, with the Greek Goetia and they started at funeral rites and stuff, didn't they?
Yeah, well, yeah, essentially, yeah, the funerary practices, and yeah, the idea of engaging with the dead and how to work with the dead, and all the technology that comes along with that. So the Greek magical papyri, as I said, is just a treasure trove of this technology, this sorcerous technology that we can use really quite simply. A lot of people seem to look at the document, they look at the book, and they go, "Oh my God, how do I work
I
with this?"
find it a little bit off-putting because it's so kind of jumbled together and hard to navigate, I find. And
Well,
like I heard yesterday or recently that a lot of the times where it says like use bull's eyes or a ram's brain, that it's not even talking about actual ram's brains, it's talking about like herbs and stuff, which
that's definitely a possibility. Yeah, I think I read the same thing.
Yeah.
Being familiar with your pharmacos, the plants and things that grow in your area, it's definitely very important. Of course, there's no substitute for the actual materia, if that's what the spell is asking for. You can experiment with other things and see if you get the results, and that's kind of the most important thing, is seeing if the results are still possible. And the only way to find out is to try. Like if you have the ram's brain, for instance, I mean, you can find alternative methods, via different kinds of working magic, really, with materia to create substitutes for those things.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of an example from Rob Ryder Hill's recent Little Key, I think it is, when there's the what's it called, the thing, the lambskin.
Yes.
So
the
parchment. Yeah. So he talks about, obviously it's hard to get in the 21st century in Britain anyway. So he talks about just treating a regular bit of consecrated paper like it was, and going through the steps, scraping it, just get as close as you can to the spell. And
so like consecrated parchment paper, it's accessible. You can even get papyrus these days. So I know one guy who's making his own, so it's definitely a possibility. But to your earlier point, when you said it's quite a mishmash of a book, you have to realize that the magical papyri doesn't represent a single school of thought or it's not a single body of work.
It's pages from magical journals from all over
history. We're talking like 500 years of history in this document. You could imagine today if we had 500 years worth of sorcerous technology to draw on from today in a continuous living tradition. And when these documents were written, they were living in that period. They had that culture that was accessible to them. And you can see the transmission of the technology though through history. So you see similar patterns, you see similar sorcerous technologies being used, from the Hellenistic period all the way up to like the Byzantium. We have the hygromantia, and then onwards into the European grimoires. So the same thread exists. And I think when we're talking about grimoires in particular, it's like we can try our absolute best to be as traditional as possible and to follow every rule to the absolute T. But like the idea of that is, for me personally, I think it's not the way we should approach grimoire magic, and it's not the way we should really approach the PGM in general. Times have changed. People live in different locations from where these documents were written. The materia is different. So we can adapt, we can change, we can find similar things that match, you know, the same function as it would in their society to as it does to our society. And we can utilize that. And even for things like, you know, like the defictiones, the lead tablets that you bury in graveyards, you know, getting soft, you know, lead plates is kind of, you know, it's, you know, I'm sure it's possible, but I mean, you can equally just get some, you know, virgin paper, consecrate it to Saturn, you know, with its link to lead, and there you go. You have an equivalent. You know, it might not be perfect, but you know, you can even see in the document in the Greek magical papyri certain instances where the author, that specific author in that spell is saying, you know, well, you know, if you can't find this, then you can use this. And you see that too again in the grimoires later on. You know, if you can't find this, then try this. So there's always an alternative method or alternative approach offered to you. So tradition can just be stagnant, you know, and what are you going to learn? You know, you're not going to learn anything from having just followed it perfectly. You live in an environment that's alive, you know, that's growing and changing, and you find what works for you in your time and place. Look, as an example, like for the longest time, I was like looking for the correct kind of wand for the Grimoirium Verum work, and I have one. But I couldn't find, you know, the exact kind of wood, you know, the elder wood, which is hollow. And Jake Stratton-Kent had been saying online for so long, you know, find equivalents and that. And, you know, I looked all over the place for essentially a bamboo equivalent, a bamboo wand.
Because that's hollow.
But like everywhere I went, the bamboo is so thick. And how am I going to do this? It's impossible. So, but anyway, very recently, just a few weeks ago, I actually went out and I just went and spent some time up on the mountains next to my house. And I just went looking for something, you know, I went looking for materia, and we have graveyards and all sorts up there as well. So there's all sorts of places for me to go and, you know, and get up to things. But I found the most perfect little bamboo shoot. And brilliant, you know. And you know, I went back later on and I did, you know, prepared for it and went back and harvested it as correctly as I could. And yeah, there you go. So I have two wands now. I have one that's correct for traditional for the actual Grimoire Verum, and I have another one which I've yet to fully prepare, but it's, you know, it's there.
And I guess if you have spirit contacts, I mean, presumably those spirits that contacted you in the dream way back, they're still kind of with you in some sense. I don't know if you have to work with them.
Well, the spirit in the dream was if not Hecate, then it was a spirit under Hecate.
Oh, keys, yeah.
Well, I had no idea at the time, but then I was, I'd never worked with a god or a goddess because I've been working in this, you know, the Golden Dawn, you know, model perspective of reality. So it was like gods was something that you invoked, you know, to get a modicum of their influence or their power. And, you know, like that idea of like invocating and evocating, it just never sat well with me. I never went out of my way to do an invocation. Okay, I'm going to invoke this god. It didn't interest me. I was more interested in having an external spirit present, you know, and come in and saying hello. But then, you know, the more I read, the more I realized, you know, the idea of invocating and evocating is it's a fallacy. You know, that they were both used interchangeably, and the idea that what the Golden Dawn was doing, what Philemma is doing, is saying, you know, it's like you were saying before, it's more of a psychological approach. You know, you're calling them into you to change yourself somehow. I mean, and you know, sure, a lot of people practice that and do that and have a lot of results, and that's great. But when I started like seriously going, okay, I'm really going to do it from the spirit model perspective, I just said, great, I'm going to just make an altar to a god or a goddess. And I'm like, well, which one should I pick? And I'm like, well, Hecate rules the moon, and the moon's really important. And she has all these different facets, you know, and I thought, well, I'm just going to make an altar to Hecate. And I started working with her that way. And really quickly, I got a positive feedback saying, hey, well done, you finally made it.
Yeah. Hecate seems to be everywhere at the moment. I was speaking to Sarah Mastros about this. You know, I'd never heard of Hecate till 3 or 4 years. Well, I'd heard of her, but so many people are exclusively working with her, and you know, she's just, her name is everywhere. And I wonder, is that us bringing her through, or is it her kind of manifesting in the earth again?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. It's a feedback loop, isn't it? There's the more we feed into it, the more she feeds back in, and she's definitely gaining more influence for sure. And you know, like with Hecate as well, especially in the Greek magical papyri, you know, she has her counterpart with Helios, which is another Titan that I work with specifically. So I suppose, you know, Hecate isn't really I mean, she is a goddess, but she is a Titan. She's the liminal goddess, you know, a liminal Titan that they, you know, the Olympian gods couldn't bind. They couldn't trap her in Tartarus. So, you know, she's a very powerful spirit, a very powerful entity. You know, she exists in every liminal time and every liminal space. So you can't get rid of her. And she has so many different forms and different type of names. And so of course she's as old as humanity, and she's going to be with us for a long time. Yeah, for
sure. Continuing with the PGM, your pamphlet, The Wondrous Spell. What out of the whole PGM made you pick that one particular spell to concentrate on for your pamphlet?
Well, there's so many spells, and my initial idea was do a comparison of a bunch of different ones, like several of them. But what I was really looking for was I was looking for a way to showcase the technology in the PGM. And I read Stephen Skinner's book, on the Greek magical papyri, and you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about which one I was going to work with, and this one just sort of popped. It just sort of and it's quite long as well compared to a lot of the other spells. It's you know, it's a few pages, and it's got lots of nice pictures, and you know, it's got interesting sigils and things. And so I thought this has such a broad spectrum that you can showcase this off as a modular spell. You can take any element out of this spell and work with it individually. So there's an invocation to Helios. You can just use that if you want, you know, just for whatever purpose that you want to work with Helios. You know, there's the Defixiones that I mentioned earlier, you know, so there's images, you know, there's things that you can do with that. There's the image magic using wax, using knots. There's knot magic. There's even some gematria in there with Abraxas. Oh, yeah. There's literally, like, if you look through the PGM, this one spell has almost everything, really. And I tried to cover as many different things as I could and sort of flesh out. So, you know, it's a very brief pamphlet, but still, I tried my best to like sort of fully explain to everybody like how you can use it in this modular way. You see in other spells in the document as well that follow a very, very similar pattern, the same invocation to Helios, but what they've done is they've just switched out the part that, you know, is the intention of that spell with something else. So you can swap and choose. You can change the imagery as much as you like. You know, of course, you have to sort of meditate on what the Voces Magica are and what their purposes are. but there's specific formula in there, like the Mascale formula and others that you can swap and choose, swap and change them out as you feel them necessary. And at the end of the day, success is proof. So
have you used that spell successfully?
The exact spell as written out? No. I haven't actually used it to compel a woman to fall in love with me. Yeah. No, but I have used essentially every individual component of the spell in other work to achieve different goals. And yeah, there's success. There's success with it. I've even used them in conjunction with other spells in the PGM to sort of like supplement them. And I think more importantly, really, is working with this technology with the grimoires. So it's my first experience going the full traditional way of working myself into the Grimoirium Verum. I didn't do it by any of the book's way, but I used Jake Stratton-Kent's True Grimoire as sort of the foundation, and I heavily supplemented my work with the PGM. And yeah, I think like I said before about tradition, you have to adapt, you have to change and grow. There's certain elements that are missing from certain grimoires that you can just take a chunk out of the PGM and slot it in, and you have a liturgy that you can function with. Also, Jake Stratton-Kent's Goetic liturgy also helped.
That's fantastic. I've got that. Yeah, and I've used it to quite wondrous effect, actually.
Yeah, and that has a thelemic and EQ, well, very subtly, but it has some EQ elements in there as well. So there's you can't be a slave to the traditional method. You have to change things and adapt them. Definitely.
I didn't know you were into EQ until I read it in the Wondrous Spell. But I've had Kath Thompson on recently, and I had the Temple of Babylon Chronos on, who are very English Kabbalah. So that's a very interesting new development as well, I think. So tell us a bit more about your work with the Grimoirium Verum.
So, well, we kind of just touched on it a little, but the Grimoirium Verum for me is, I suppose, it has such a compared to other grimoires that are really popular today, like for instance the Ars Goetia, it has a spirit positive attitude in that it's not the traditional Solomonic style of standing in a circle yelling at a triangle, telling I mean, it has some elements that are in there, but I mean, you
very
can adapt
little compared to the others, I would say.
Yeah, and it also has a functional hierarchy, and Weyer and Reginald Scott with their work was a those documents, like the Pseudonym Arcana and the Discovery of Witchcraft, they were written to warn people not to do magic. And they became the manuals that later grimoirists used to make their grimoires, to produce, the grimoires that came after them. And of course there was the bottleneck with Agrippa, where, many of concepts that went into Agrippa were then later adapted and copied in to the later grimoires, especially the Ars Goetia, which is it's a mess. It doesn't have a function. It's deliberately sabotaged, but then people still think it's special.
You think it's deliberately sabotaged?
I'm pretty confident. Yes, I would argue the way, for instance, the Four Kings, that are presented as the hierarchy, because there aren't 72 spirits. There's a few more, but most people don't. You know, but the kings have been scrambled. Like Ziminar, for instance, in the north, I think is makes no sense. There's no precedent for that spirit, and there's no instructions on how to work with them. So whereas I mean, the Grimoirium Verum doesn't have the four kings per se, but it does have an intermediary spirit. For instance, it has, depending on how you feel, Skirlin or the Duke Cyrac in the east. And that intermediary spirit is the one who introduces you to the rest of the spirits. The Ars Goetia doesn't have that element. It's been lost. For instance, in the Book of Oberon, you have Tanta Valerian, who is another spirit who has that intermediary role, who you work with as a gatekeeper. He opens the gate to allow you to then move on to work with the other spirits. So for me, when I read about the Grimoirium Verum with from Jake's work and all his other books, his encyclopedia Goetica is phenomenal. Yeah, recommend to everyone. Please go and read that.
Got them all.
Yeah. And yeah, he makes such a powerful case for it. I thought, well, I can't not get in on this. I have to try, and I'm going to try my absolute best to do it as traditionally as I can, despite everything that I've just told you, because I want to have that experience. I want to really, I wanted to really dedicate myself to it. But I think I should preface this by saying that I only just finished my first pact a few months, like 2 months ago. So I'm not the biggest expert on the subject, but I have got an initial experience from it. And yeah, the actual because I spent 2 years working up to it.
Yeah.
With Rob Ryder Hill and a few others, and we were working on how to approach it and what how to do it, and getting all the things that we needed to do it as correctly as we could, and like it were just absolutely fantastic. It was it was definitely an experience. Yeah. So I think you can look at the other grimoires and you can try and work with them. A lot of the ones, especially like the Book of Oberon, that also has a phenomenally laid out system that's equally as valid. You could work with that, but the Grimoirium Verum allows you to work it once you've begun it anyway. It allows you this method to work with pretty much any system, any grimoire that you want, really, if you're inclined to. So it's I've had a really interesting experience thus far. But
so could I ask how, it's still not clear for me, I mean, I haven't really delved into it too far, but you want to evoke a certain spirit.
Conjure.
Yeah. So
yeah.
you start with the 3 chiefs.
Yes.
Find out
yes.
which spirit your chief rules.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then you contact the chief.
Mm-hmm.
They put you on to Skrillin, and then Skrillin.
Other way around. So okay. you begin, well, yeah, you begin with the first character and you contact Skirlin, and then from Skirlin you go on to summon the chief, and then from the chief the deputy, and from the deputy the follower or subordinate or the lower spirit, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, so it's always a process of like top down. You're going from the top and working your way down, and you should feel like the idea of the Skirlin being the intermediary, that all the spirits have an intermediary element. Skirlin is just the chief intermediary of this system, but all the spirits have an intermediary quality. So even when you get down to what looks like bedrock in the grimoire from one of the 18 main spirits, you know, there are some cases where you see that there are other spirits underneath them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's spirits all the way down, I guess.
And so your pact, how did you go about making this pact? Presumably you've got all or most of your tools, you've got your floor circle. Could you kind of talk me through the process a bit, or is that too secret?
Oh, it's not secret, but well, okay. You begin by harvesting your materia. So there are certain materia that must be harvested at certain times. You know, so you have like dawn on Wednesday is a big one, and you know, so that you know, certain days, certain hours, you harvest your materia, and then you consecrate and produce, say, you know, the wand or whichever part you're doing. And you know, there's methods for doing that. And again, I supplemented some elements. Like Jake Stratton has some elements of the PGM in his true grimoire that I just thought, wow, okay, I'm going to use that. That's great. But when I looked at those spells in the PGM, I started finding other ones that were just as equally interesting. So I used those. And yeah, once you've harvested your materia, you consecrate them. You consecrate everything as best you can. If you don't have a certain thing, black cat's blood being one, for instance, or like mole's blood, or you know, you can, like I said before, you can find alternatives to doing that. I made a clay black cat and I filled it with hemlock juice, and then cut the head off the black cat. And I mean, and you know, I have a black cat, so it had black hair and all sorts of the cat stuff. And then consecrated to, you know, certain things, and you know, and so, you know, it may not necessarily be specifically the blood, but then, you know, when I actually got to doing the actual first making the first character and calling on Skirling for the first time, I hadn't fully finished. I hadn't fully prepared everything as best as I could, but I was like, I need to just start. So there's a few things that I haven't entirely finished, but I mean, they're as finished as I can do right now. So anyway, I was kind of expecting that it wouldn't work. And I at first it didn't, and I was, this doesn't feel good. But then I started over again, and you know, you see this a lot in the grimoires. You know, you can do a full series of the steps or the evocation process, and nothing will happen. So you have an alternative that you can go to, or you repeat it, and then you repeat it again. And if that doesn't work, you have an alternative, you know, and those ones are in like later grimoires where, you know, when you see them, you know, the magician like holding the sigil under a fire or something, you know, burning cat shit over it or something. So it like, I didn't
spirit torture like the Humphrey Gilbert.
Yes, yeah, well, I'd love to talk about those guys as well, but the way I approached it was I prepared a feast, and I approached it as like, here's a banquet, come and join me, you know, and not there was no triangle in sight apart from the one I was in, and there were, you know, not, you know, outside the circle. I wasn't, you know, no hellfire and conjurations or anything, but so I went about it that way. But when I started the process again, I was doing the headless rite, which I began my rite with, and then oh crap, it's not worked. So I started again, and I just started going into it, and boom, and I was okay. Hello. Now it's time to start. So yeah, and then you have a parchment which you have. It's like a 4-day process of preparing this, and of course, you know, you should technically, you know, sacrifice a goat and skin it and prepare the parchment properly and correctly. But I mean, I didn't do that. I couldn't possibly do anything like that. No. So I just used, I had a piece of parchment, and I had some consecrated paper, which I prepared previously for the pact. And you have one of the tools you have is an ink well with ink in it, consecrated ink. And you have a lancet which you pierce your finger with. And you don't have, that was one of the scariest parts when I was building up to that, because I'm not a big fan of needles. But yeah, I got over that. I worked my way through it using the litany against fear from Dune, which I think is, thank you, Rob. That was one of his, and that worked. It really did. Like at the culmination of it, I just did it. It was like, you've got to do this. And then you drip the blood into the ink instead of, you don't have to draw so much blood that no. I put a drop or two into the ink, and then the ink is equivalent with the blood, and then you use that, and you draw out the sigil of Skirlin and the chief or chiefs that if you can do all three at the same time, or you can just pick one that you're interested in working with, and then you will go to the deputy underneath that spirit, and then the spirit underneath that. And after you've finished drawing each one, you suffumigate the document with frankincense, and then you work through. At each point, you're sort of like, you're conjuring each spirit, and they come in turn. And essentially they, one boss brings up the next one, and then it brings up the next one. And then you go from there. And then where the grimoires stop, what they don't tell you about is literally like really the most important part, which is like the communication and actual negotiation that you have to undergo with the spirit. There's not much in the document about those. The grimoires are just starter manuals. They're like, here you go. Exactly. This is how you begin.
Yeah.
An
introduction.
Yeah, they're an introduction. And the thing is, it's after that you actually start to work the magic. They actually start to explore and work with the spirits and learn from them. And it's not, my first conjuration was not to get X, Y, or Z. It was like, hey, I'm ready. I want to work with you guys. Yeah. Let's start. So that's about as much as I went through with my first experience of it. And now I have a certain part of my temple space which is just dedicated to the spirit that I specifically wanted to work with. And there's a rapport, building a relationship, offerings. We have to make a contract, essentially. You say, and I got that contract template from Stian. He helped me with that, and you go through it like a legal document. So I will do this for you if you do that for me, and da 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 da. And you have to negotiate it. And from all my previous experiences, I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna say I want this, or I'm gonna, let's do this and this and this. And Skirlin was like, nah, it's not gonna work. we have to change something. And okay, so I should preface this by saying, I should go back and say, find a method of divination which works for you. I use a coin.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. How do you actually get the communication?
Yeah. So I didn't see anything physical. Sometimes I hear things, but there was a very significant presence in the room, an unmistakable presence, but it wasn't somebody sitting in front of me talking to me.
No.
But yeah, I have coins, and I flick so many times to confirm which side of the coin. I've painted black and white. So which side means yes. So you have to confirm that first, and then you go on from there. And then I was just going through the document. Is this okay? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. Are we finished? No. Oh, crap. So I had to go back through every point and sort of like renegotiate. And then it turned out that I needed to add something. So I ended up adding something to the document and asked one more time, is the document okay? And the answer was yes. So, okay, cool.
It's like a lot of work.
Well, it took, I mean, the book says you fast for 3 days, but I went for 2 weeks because I want to torture myself, apparently. But I tried to go through the process of, so I going to my normal, my normal practice as I was building up to this is I started with Resh, the Thelemic Resh practice.
Yeah, Liber Resh.
But then I switched out Resh and changed it to working with the Four Kings. And they work really well with any grimoire
so
like setup, I imagine.
The Four Kings you use are Paimon, Aegon, Oriens, and Amaimon.
Yeah. So a Maimon in the east at dawn, and a Maimon to the south at noon, a Paimon to the west at sunset, and finally Aegon to the north at midnight. And I have I wrote a series of adorations to them, and I switched out Resh for this practice.
Yeah.
And it suddenly started to feel so much more personal because I was getting feedback from what I was doing, the way I was doing it. And they were saying, tweak this, change this. We don't like what you're doing there. We prefer it if you did this. And I was getting suddenly, and it's still this evolving process. And so I feel so much more feedback from it. It feels more alive than doing Resh for me.
Yeah.
But it fulfills the same function. And what I was doing is I was preparing myself to undergo this, and I was doing it for a good 6 months, I think, before I finally got to do.
You were doing the invocation, like the Resh thing for 6 months. Did you say? And I was fasting for 2 weeks.
Every day for 6 months. Well, and the thing is, after it, I just didn't stop. I'm still going. So I just continued because it's like this process for me is really important, and it makes me feel really connected to what I'm doing. I'm just involved with it now. It's every moment of my my waking day. I'm thinking, well, how long have I got until my next one, sort of thing. So, and I this is some good advice that Rob and I came up with. But if you have a little baggie and you can fit everything that you need for your ritual practice into something about this size and carry it with you everywhere, then you can do magic anywhere on the go. You know, I was doing I ended up doing an adoration on a plane a few times when I went back to England, and you'd be very quiet and subtle about it, but there's trying to make it literally part of what you're doing all the time every day is quite important.
I think this is a bit of a problem for me because of my work situation, and I can imagine someone with a family and children, it would be even more difficult. But you can't always guarantee that you're going to be able to, unless you do it kind of in your mind, or you could creep to the bathroom. Well,
that's what I do at work.
At work.
At work, if the classrooms are full, I just pop to the bathroom. And I've done it a few times in pubs and bars. But that's the thing, you make it streamlined so that it's possible in that environment, and you can, but then you're connected to the work all the time. You're connected to it every day. So that for me is really important to my practice now.
Any other daily practices Do you meditate and stuff like that?
Yeah, I do Zazen in the morning for 20 minutes. I do a tarot reading for myself every day. It's those sort of things. But yeah, the adoration at dawn to Oriens is the big one. That's when I do like the full headless ritual and all the rest of it. So, but then the subsequent ones during the day, I do the shorthand versions because it's for simplicity's sake.
Yeah.
And they seem totally fine with that. That's cool with them. But the Four Kings themselves, I think, are really interesting because they're an element that you can work with in any context. They're worth getting familiar with, definitely. And yeah, especially when it comes to things like necromancy, they can be quite useful in that situation as well. Yeah.
We haven't talked that much about necromancy, really. That was going to be one of the main focuses of my interview. So what was the last, the Wondrous Spell, obviously, is a necromantic one. Have you done anything necromantic recently?
Recently? Well, what have I done recently? Well, I moved house recently, I suppose. I did a specific spell from the PGM on New Year's Eve to change my situation and get a house where I could actually do magic. And I very quickly found the place where I'm in now. And I'm right next to a shrine, graveyard. I'm on a crossroads by a river. So I got everything I need. So I suppose for the last few months, I've been going and adventuring really every weekend around the mountains and just sort of exploring, finding the graves. One of the first things I do is I try to find the oldest grave I can and make an introduction there. So take flowers, take spring water mixed with honey, take things that like, saying, hey, I'm in the neighborhood, but I'm not looking to do any specific necromantic compulsion right now.
No. Yeah. There's some great graveyards in Aberdeen. There's one in the dead center of town, boom, boom. But some of the gravestones are so old that they've been, the actual writings rubbed off. But there's like ones going right back to the 17th century. So, I think that would be a good place to start. And I suppose you can do it. Maybe not that one because it's right in the center of town, and if you go there at night, there's going to be drunken revelers and stuff.
Well, what you do is you take some grave dirt. So, like, once you've found what you believe to be the oldest grave, which is like essentially like we were talking about hierarchies in the grimoires before. The oldest grave is usually like the beginning of it's the beginning of the graveyard, and that person is sort of the eldest spirit, so you pay respect to them first.
Starting with the boss.
Essentially, yeah. And then you can take, with permission from the spirit, via using a divinatory technique, you could take some of the graveyard dirt home with you. You can even sweep the dust from the gate and just take that home with you. That sort of material is pretty important to necromancy. Of course, I live in a very far away country from my hometown, in England. So I have a big sealed jar of grave dirt from my family grave plot in the UK. And when I move house, one of the first things I do is I sprinkle a bit of that around my house, and it sort of establishes, like, what's the best way to put it? This is like you draw your power. You can draw power from it. You can draw your spirits of your ancestors will come through for you. They'll protect you. They'll love you and look after you. They have a vested interest in your immediate survival. you know.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. You know, formally human beings are going to be more sympathetic to you than perhaps some of the spirits encountered in grimoires.
Yeah, actually, I have a quote that I wanted to read from the excellent book by Job, which I thought was really perfect for this, which is, trust no spirit visible or invisible, but the spirit of dead men, for they love man more than the others do.
Yeah. It's
So
a fantastic book, the excellent book. I've got it there.
Yeah, and while I don't condone the methods that they use to do that, I mean, even the spirits in the book, you know, when an apostle shows up to tell you that you're doing it wrong, and to chill out, you know,
go easy, man.
Chill out a bit, you know. So yeah, but there's stuff to learn in there, you know, there's techniques and technology to learn in there, especially when it comes to this blend, there's this blending of necromantic work with grimoire work, because they're working with Oriens of the Four Kings and Azazel, who's like the Lord of the Dead, who presides over them, to find a book, to make a book. They want to have this book, right?
Yeah.
So the technology that they're using is pretty much out of the PGM in many cases. It's very similar. You know, they're using sorcerer's compulsion. Well, yeah, but they're using like sorcerer's compulsion, you know, and you know, granted, it's pretty horrible stuff, some of the stuff that they're doing, but it you know, it worked, and they created a document, and in the end they got what they wanted, because after Al Cummings produced the book exists. Exactly. So now they have their book. Their magic came true.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. And right. They both met rather unfortunate ends as well, which I can't help but think might have been a little bit of retribution.
Well, yeah, essentially, yeah, you know, you get what you deserve. Yeah, so
that's fantastic. On a perhaps lighter note, you know, as on your journey through magic, have you ever had a spell that's gone like disastrously wrong or spectacularly right, or had really freaky unseen consequences from any of your workings?
Probably too many to really think. I mean, I've had a lot of positives, but then I don't ask for so much. But when I do ask for it, I tend to get what I need as opposed to what I want. But I think one of the biggest disasters is an event that happened at university, where me and my friend decided to make an astral cat. And we thought it would be fun. We were, you know, kids playing with chaos magic, and we'd read, you know, Liber Null and Psychonaut and Liber Chaos and that. And then we were like, let's make a servitor, but, you know, let's make it like a house pet. And it, you know, we thought it worked well, and okay, cool. But then we were just messing around. We didn't really tell it to do anything. Anyway, it ended up being quite disastrous, and it you know, people in our house, it was a shared accommodation, but people were having nightmares. A computer set on fire. Someone's mirror shattered. Yeah, you know, but I had a really awful nightmare experience. And finally my friend was coming home from work, and as I remember, he called me and he said, "There's something, I'm getting really bad feeling." And I ran out of the house to look, because he was coming towards us, but the street lights were popping behind him.
Good Lord.
And I was like, okay, we need to we need to end this. So we ended up doing like a big old banishing thing, and then like told it to, you know, got rid of it. But, you know, like a few of the housemates were not interested in magic, or they were just like, oh, you guys are just being silly. But after that, they were like, kind of, yeah. I think something definitely happened there.
That's for sure. Jesus.
Yeah, that was a scary one. I'm trying to think of anything else that was more recent. My old place, when I first moved in here, I came home from work once and just all the dishes and all the pans had been thrown out everywhere. That was pretty worrying.
I've heard that's quite common with spirit work, that occasionally you will get a kind of poltergeist activity.
Yeah, this was a bit much, but yeah. And then the toilet kept flushing itself and things, but you know, things like that. But you know, like nothing like that's happened for quite a long time now. Yeah, I can't think of anything else that was really mega disastrous off the top of my head.
I think that's enough. Have you ever like seen a spirit, like, you know?
Yeah, some of, like I said at the beginning, some of my first experiences were straight up like in my face sort of experience.
Aye, but not when you were dreaming, when you were in your waking state.
Well, they tended to blend. The one in Scotland happened in front of me first, and then I had a dream afterwards where it came again and said, "Hey,
hi man, oh hi."
Yeah, hello. It wasn't human. It was made of leaves and branches and moss and stuff. Wow. Yeah, that was unusual. And another one, but it was, another one that happened while I was at school, and that was frightening. But yeah, so I've had visual experiences in ritual as well, which was what my initial curiosity was, to achieve that. I want to see it. I want to be able to say that I've done it. Yeah. But I will say that it's quite rare. I've had more audio experiences really than full-on visual experiences. But what I tend to get is just an unmistakable sense of presence that like I described it to someone else recently as you know, when you get that feeling that someone's looking at you and you turn around and then there actually is someone looking at you. Yeah, it feels like that. Like that's the sort of sense that I experience.
I had that for the first time a month ago, maybe, when I've been starting to do. I live in a 3-road crossroads, and there's a Catholic church just right out there. And I'm not sure if Ikati really likes Catholic churches, but it occurred to me to start doing dark moon offerings, putting them on the church posts over there. There's like a gate with 2 pillars. So I've been leaving like Mediterranean style food, you know, bread, olive oil, pomegranates and all that. And one night I hadn't done any invocations or anything, but I just felt something over my shoulder, and it was like, oh my God, there's definitely something here. And then a couple of days after that, I also did the 418 Kath Thompson ritual.
Oh yes,
and right. I did some stuff out of the Goetic liturgy, and literally my whole life fell apart for about a week. Everything was just pure chaos. My girlfriend temporarily finished with me. My job got so unbearable, I ended up leaving recently. But now everything seems to have, you know, I think it sometimes breaks down all the stuff that's not working in your life. And now I've got a new job, which sounds much more my cup of tea.
Excellent.
So yeah.
So like, I think what's worth mentioning is when you do start to practice magic like this, your life will get shaken up. For me, I was building up to the work with the Grimoirium Verum, and I literally sent off the pamphlet, A Wondrous Spell. And my father's brain cancer condition got really, really bad, and I had to go back to the UK and to be with him as he passed away. And all of that felt like an initiation. It was an underworld journey as such. You know, you were, you know, there's something to learn from life, you know, in every situation. And that for me felt like a really powerful like chapter in my life. And you know, for all of this to come together at the same time, it was very unusual, very, very, yeah, very, very, I know it sounds really sad, but it was very like a beautiful moment, really. And yeah, and having you know, knowledge of necromantic practices, you know, the idea of necromancy sounds like something that's really scary, and you're in the graveyard at the middle of the night, but really what you're doing is you can, by doing these practices with specifically like vengeful spirits, or, you know, spirits who've died before their time, you know, if they're wandering, if they're lost, if they can't move on, you're really, by giving them a task, you're helping them.
Yeah.
By the sense when they've completed something, it allows them to be at peace. It allows them to move on. So for me, like, this felt like a culmination of things all coming together. And then being with my dad through that process allowed me to have like hands-on experience immediately with, you know, my father, and being with him and helping him, and then, you know, being present throughout the whole process of the funeral and everything. And it was very, very intense time. But yeah, definitely, if you start working this kind of magic, things like this will happen, you know.
Absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. I was just going to finish on an English magician in Japan. Have you come across any like Japanese Taoist magicians or Buddhist, you know, magic, or are you just separate from it all?
So the Japanese, I won't speak for all the Japanese, but I mean, from my experience of being here for 13 years or so, the Japanese tend to be animist. They have a very strong animistic tendency to everything. So, you know, when you throw an item away, you say thank you, and that's really just become part of what I do every day. I've also been involved in 2 funerals in Japan as well. I mean, right before my father passed away, my fiance's grandfather passed away, and I was heavily involved in that whole process as well. And there's a very in-depth process of caring for the dead. You have to give offerings at certain times of specific foods for so many days afterwards. And they have a very interesting like parallel with like ancient Mediterranean practices, Mediterranean ideas of the underworld, that you have to travel over a river once you've passed, and, you know, you leave offerings to the dead as they progress through this process of traveling to the underworld. It's not pop and you're in heaven.
Yeah.
And you have to honor the dead in a certain way, you know, that means that they fully transition and they arrive in the afterlife, you know, correctly. So I took all of that information in, and I've definitely taken that on board, and I used that specifically with my father as well, and honored him as he passed. I didn't use all the specific Japanese food types because they're really crazy, and like you have these little tiny dishes with all these different foods. But what I would do is I'd leave my dad's favorite food, and you know, my dad loved a whiskey, so I would just, you know, I pour him whiskey, and you know, so I have a little altar set for my father as well, where I honor him every week, and make sure he's fed and he's got, you know, fresh water. That's something that's really important for the dead, is having access to fresh water. You know, there's like they're parched as they're going through this process.
Yeah.
I spent some time in China as well, and they have this really interesting practice where they burn like cardboard or paper items that the deceased then takes with them.
Yeah.
So you can get like money. That's like a really common one, but like you can burn like,
I've seen them burning like wads of money, and
you can get like paper Rolexes and you know, like sports cars, even girlfriends, you know, like things, you know, like, you know, you can all that sort of things you can send off with the deceased as well. So I've always just been fascinated by that process, and was so disconnected from it in the UK specifically. I don't have experience with the rest. Europe, but it's very much you die and then you're whisked off immediately to the morgue, and they prepare you, and then you have a funeral.
Yeah.
And when my father passed, I specifically said to he died in the evening at 5 p.m. And my mum was like, okay, we have to call somebody. And I said, no, it's okay. We'll spend the night with him. And I spent the night with my father and looked after him, drank the best part of a bottle of whiskey and watched a few movies. But, being involved with necromancy means that you're prepared for this, and it's you're working with life, you're working with your life in a specific way that you're I don't really know how best to put it, but you're preparing yourself, I suppose, in a way. That death isn't necessarily something that we should be fearful of, and it's something that we should be involved with.
Absolutely.
I like the idea of the wake as well.
Oh yeah.
Well, the Japanese do that the night before the cremation, and we just have we stay with the corpse. The body is laid out with the food all around it. And we feast around the spirit, and we drink and get very drunk and talk about all of the good things that they did, and you remember all the embarrassing things and the adventures they got up to, and it's all part of this process, and that for me was an honor to be involved with it. But it gets it's really very intense, because after the cremation you all go and use these long black chopsticks, and you pick up the bones, and you put the bones into an urn, as a family. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then the last bone is the top of the skull, which you rest on the top of the urn before you seal it. So being involved at that level is it's really, really interesting. And I don't think many foreigners get that full experience, living here. It's quite a closed practice,
Yeah. I think the way necromancy is perceived as being dark and evil is the way we perceive death in the Western world. In the UK is, it's a tragic thing, and you want to just get it all done, sterile. And, I think I hope magic can change the world, I believe. And I honestly think that you guys and all the community are possibly going to change culture for the next, I think we're living in a renaissance again because of the internet. The first thing that you could compare it to the printing press. Everybody's doing pamphlets again. That was the first thing that, apart from Bibles. I think we're living in beautiful times. I said that to stay in as well. And I think you guys are leading the way. So
thank you. I mean, it's something that I think that the occult community in the West needs to really study the source materials more than allowing the 19th century and the 20th century, the Golden Dawn and the Theosophists, dictate their current practice, because they divorced so much from their practice that it left it quite sterile. Bringing these practices back in, I think that we don't have a living tradition yet. But in a few generations, then if this continues, if this snowballs, then I really hope that the future of the culture in the West develops into something better than it is right now.
I'm definitely optimistic about that. I truly believe it is changing. Well, I think that's a perfect way to end, Matt. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been a pleasure not only talking to you today, but we've talked a wee bit leading up to the interview. Hopefully we'll keep on and keep in touch. I always want my guests to come back at some point when they've got new stuff to talk about. Is there anything you want to promote or want me to put in the notes to the show? Your Facebook, your pamphlet, any new books or anything?
Well, you can you can put in the Ceremonial Magick School, which is a Facebook group that I help mod. There's a lot of interesting conversation there that people can get involved with. And if people are interested in working with the Grimoires specifically, then you can check out Goetia and I always forget the name of it. It's Goetia and Grimoire Magick.
Yeah, I think so.
Goetia, yeah, Goetia and Grimoire Magick, which Stian began, and I mod there as well. And yeah, that's more serious Grimoire specific work. And if anyone is interested in the Grimoire Verum specifically, I run the Grimoirium Verum study group, which is it's a very strict group. It's not, you know, it's very tightly focused onto the specifics of working with that grimoire. And yeah, if people are really interested in joining and becoming members and they want to like get themselves involved, then I recommend those groups, definitely. Yeah.
Fantastic, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure. When I cut off, it always cuts off. We don't get to talk at the end. So I'll say goodbye now, mate. Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Okay, Matt, thank you very much and good night, sir.